read 2 whole chapters of Emilio Moran's Human Adaptability. We read the chapter 2, the theories of human habitat interaction. And then we just kept on going and read the concepts and methods chapter. Fundamental concepts and methods. So this is a pretty big deal. And you know it's a big deal because when I put this in there, this is what PowerPoint told me to put up on the board, is a lot of formulas. Some of you know I've become fascinated with what PowerPoint tells me to do. This is what they told me to do. I'm also fascinated by this person who shows up at the very beginning of the chapter. Good thing I had my paper book. Check that guy out. Santa coming to give us presents, to help us through this Christmas season. Santa.
Look as jolly as
not quite as jolly as I remember the last time he was coming. You know, coming down the chimney, you gotta thin down, you know, get a little more sprightly over the years, get ready to deliver the presents. Yeah, who else could this be? What's this person doing here? He's like,
a lot of his ideas were just questions about how weird it was.
you think it's Freud? Oh, it looks like Freud too, the Freudian Santa Claus coming down your chimney. Oh boy, yeah, could be Freud, I guess. Maybe it's Marx.
I thought it was some sort of communist guy.
What communist? Oh, it's Darwin. It's Darwin. What is Darwin doing here, Liam? Wondering. Putting to bed some deterministic stuff. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what Darwin is doing here, but I think if you put him there, you're going to take it more seriously. If Santa Claus shows up at the beginning of your chapter, people are like, yeah, that's serious. That's some Darwin. PowerPoint told him to put Darwin in there. All right. So we begin theories with something that is not actually a theory. It is environmental determinism. I guess it's a theory. Mickey, what's the deal with environmental determinism? I don't know. What do you think it is? Just give us the best.
Their habitat, whatever's going on there, determines what their culture would be. So there's only a certain type of resource found there. If they're going to learn to use that to the best of their ability, and it's not the game, stuff like that.
Stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, there are I guess you said there are various forms of this. Like the early forms were pretty simplistic.
Big political power, military, and they're like, yeah, we have the best place. And then like throughout time they started questioning like Renaissance and the 18th century, and they're like more towards France because the middle climates were shifting northern as kind of a product. So that is kind of like a parallel to it. They favored the more central climates, which is interesting. But like as it gets to now, it's more specific climate than you have to go through.
Yeah, I guess in the first days, it's like we're the best. Must be our climate. Our climate's the best. That was pretty much it. And then in the later days, they're more nuanced, you might say, environmental deterministic theories or ideas. Were you convinced? Are you an environmental determinist now? You should say no. You should say at the end, no, I'm not convinced. Because the problem with environmental determinism, I mean, it's got to be part of it. You can't do something that is not in your environment. However, humans are rarely limited by their environment. Right? We're always going out and getting some other stuff. And so the problem, at least, that Moran tells us at the very end of this environmental determinism section is that even in the kind of the attempts, well, he tells us that these deterministic theories, however, misuse inductive reasoning. That sounds dangerous. So basically, selective sampling led to the confirmation of many deterministic generalizations. What does that mean in plain English? Yeah.
Like when you said, I think last thing, like how there's like a spectrum of like cultures and races going up and down the line together. And as there was more mixing, they made it you're in a group now. It's not actually a group.
Certainly there was also, I mean, it kind of goes back to those Greco-Roman ideas, like we're the best must be our climate, right? And those were linked to ideas of race. And I mean, there were some very racist pronouncements along the lines of environmental determinism too, which I remember my own grandfather telling me about climates where you had to prepare for the winter, and that meant that you had to like do things, and other climates where there were like bananas all the time, and so you didn't have to prepare for life. So the people in the north were different from the people in the south. That's weird stuff, right? But I guess I just want to concentrate on this sentence for a second. You're absolutely correct that environmental determinism was linked to ideas about some very obnoxious ideas about race, culture, and environmental development. But let's say we're not doing that. We're just doing some selective sampling, which is leading to a confirmation of many. Victoria, what does this mean?
Confirmation bias. They were just looking for specific information that like agreed with what their point was.
Yeah, in the last class this morning, we talked about cherry picking, which is like you have an idea, and the only thing you're going to do is take the cases that support your idea, and then you're like, aha, idea proved. Deterministic generalization has been proved. Yeah, confirmation bias. And as he says, at a time when little was known about the workings of the physical world, the broad scope of these generalizations was striking. Yeah, very striking, the broad scope of the generalizations. So, in general, we've kind of dismissed environmental determinism. Mickey is right there. You can't just count the environment out. If we're going to count the environment out, then we're in a whole different scenario, which is probably not a good idea either. Now, from there, we swing over into cultural determinism. Uh-oh. Yeah, right. Uh-oh, wait a second. How'd that happen? There we go. There it is. Right after that sentence I was reading, we swing over into cultural determinism, and all the way across the room, it's good. Situated on different sides of the room, so you can have different sides of this debate. We have Anna. What do you got?
Harlan has to talk about where that stands unit, and he believes that we are heavily affected by the environment that we are surrounded in. Hence the fact that we do have to adapt to it in order to be successful as a group. I thought it was interesting that when he said that. It kind of sounded like he was for, we are very affected by our environment. It determines how we are emotionally and physically, but he kind of switches sides on it too, and saying that it doesn't affect us directly.
Yeah, old Boaz. There's your quote. People use what they want in the environment, and there's such cultural decisions, not the physical world, that dictate the direction of cultural change. You're right, every so often he goes back and talks about the environment and that. Who is this Franz Boas anyway? Have you heard of this guy?
I've lost the time for a reason.
Oh, go ahead, Liam. He was a cultural anthropologist. He is in some ways considered to be, in the United States, the founder of anthropology. Oh, way back in intro or cultural anthropology or some other anthropology class that you may have taken. Look at that year, 1888. What a year. It's an angel number there. 1888. Probably a little bit of an outdated term, but he was a very sympathetic person to the Inuit, one of the first sympathetic persons. Boas began his life actually as an environmental determinist. He was going up to Baffinland, the land of the Inuit, to basically prove that their harsh environmental environment of ice and snow was going to determine their culture. And while he was there, he discovered that people did a whole bunch of different things, even though they lived in a similarly harsh environment. And it basically threw him along the lines of something else, which he would then call historical particularism or cultural determinism, which basically would say that people are trying to do things and that the environment is, as Moran puts it, a limiting factor. You can't do anything. Can't fly if you don't have an airplane, but it's not determining of your culture and your cultural ideas. So Boas reacted very strongly to these environmental determinism, and of course he was also very against the kinds of racial stereotypes and racial linkage to the environment which had been very prevalent at the time. So we have here this kind of initial polar opposite, you might say, not that they're completely incompatible, but very different approaches, one being an anthropological approach and one being an approach that anthropologists pretty much discarded early on. We then go into this section called human adaptation to the environment, which Liam decided to take on. Who did you find there, Liam? Huh? Yeah.
Darwin and a couple other people from earlier time period of evolution and determinism and stuff like that. Then we got to, that was strong.
There was a lot of Darwin.
Yeah, there were like 4 or 5 paragraphs.
There was a lot of Darwin in here. Santa Claus showed up again. There he was. Yeah, it was it kind of was a strangely titled section because, boy, yeah, there's some stuff in there, and then all of a sudden Darwin comes in and all this Darwin and evolution stuff, which I love, by the way. I love evolution. Don't get me wrong. I love Darwin. Don't tell anybody. But it kind of was a little bit of a, given we'd just been treated to the environmental determinism versus the cultural determinism model, and then you have Darwin kind of coming up there doing his own thing in terms of the I guess I would say that the biologists and the people interested in evolution were kind of doing their thing over in the natural sciences, and the anthropologists and the human people were duking it out somewhere else. And so then we get to cultural ecology. And Tyler, fortunately in the middle of everything, giving us the whole reason I guess this class exists, because that's the title of the class, even though this, anyway, go ahead, Tyler. What in the world is going on there?
Julian Stewart, he was talking about how like environmental and cultural determinism is like emphasizing the use of comparative methods to conduct as was mentioned, to social structure and not as a subsidy. If we look at the Shinigami people of the Great City of and then we kind of like came to the realization that he didn't like talk about the demographics at the ethnoecology by competition from the groups, which sparked by other research strategies.
Yeah. Julian Stewart. There you have it. Culture change, multilinear evolution. So let's say you got your environmental determinists over here, countered by the cultural determinists over here, and they fight it out for a while, fight to a draw, and then Darwin's over there. And then you have Julian Stewart coming up in the 1950s, trying to kind of put things together, like back together again, you might say. There he is, multilinear evolution. And he's trying to reconcile an influence between the environment and culture, bring these things back together. And he's trying. What did you think, Tyler? Were you convinced? We're going to become Stewardians? No. Yeah, I mean, it seems like, at least according to Moran, that it was pretty I mean, he was trying to do something big, you know? I mean, look at all those big words in there. Writing big books, did some really interesting, sent people out into the field. For Moran, he's kind of like, you know, he's certainly trying to do something different and path-breaking, but there's a lot of weaknesses there, he said. He couldn't bring it together, leading us to something else. Maybe we'll call the class next time, ecological anthropology. Anaya, what's the deal with that?
Encourage people to look at the biological unit as study areas and to like get a more comprehensive approach to study.
Yeah, so here we have this other thing, and you know, I mean, as Moran puts it, in part this is based upon people who are dissatisfied. They're not happy with the way that cultural ecology has gone. And so this Rappaport and a person named Beta are much more interested in kind of causality. And they say that Julian Stewart didn't do enough to talk to us about the causal relationships. In some ways, he was himself, he was proving functionality, but not causality. Anaya, were you convinced by the ecological anthropology approach? No. Yeah, I know. As you put it, and I think it's true that there were still problems of where you put the ecosystem and how you handle change and what the role of the individual is. Well, you know, dissatisfied. But then there's problems with that. So then we hit the ethnoecological and the cognitive. Oh, those are some big words. That must be good. Right, Victoria? How good is it?
Good one. You have to do observation as well as questioning of the native people of the location. So I feel like it made a lot of sense. And that like you can't just make assumptions based off of observation because you don't actually know the reasoning behind these things. But you can't just ask them like, oh, what's this purpose for this thing? Because you have to observe it as well, I think.
Yeah, people got really excited about this. This was fun. Fun. It was a fun time. And you're right. I mean, these big words like cognitive, that just means what they really wanted to find out how people knew and think about their environment. And when I say fun, it was like fun because you'd come in with like a deck of cards that had like all these different frogs and tree species and all these things in the environment. And then you give these people the cards and you'd be like, okay, sort them into categories. And they'd be like, and you'd be like, oh, wow, the people in this land grouped together all jumping species into the same species. And so you'd find out how they think about the world out there. And it was just mind-blowing. You'd be like, whoa, the cognitive stuff. We thought we were making huge progress with this. Really fun. So should have worked. However, at the end, Moran tells us something that may be obvious to many of us, that knowledge is not synonymous with behavior. Wait, what does that mean to us in English when we're going out on a Friday night? Knowledge is not synonymous with behavior. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I mean, that would be my dumb way of putting it, right? I'm going out and I know I shouldn't be doing this, but I'm probably going to do it anyway because knowledge is not synonymous with behavior. In this case, it means something smarter, which is that, yeah, just because people sort things into piles of species on a card table doesn't mean they're going to actually, that's not necessarily what they're doing in everyday life when they are looking at or making decisions in their environment. So he says, unlike the people going out on a Friday night that I've been talking about, even populations with millenarian experience in a habitat, so 1,000 years experience, thousands of years experience in a habitat, such as the Setzal Maya of Chiapas, Mexico, use multiple criteria such as the size of trees, humidity, soil characteristics, and species compositions in making decisions on the use of habitats. Something that could be missed by researchers who pay overly zealous attention to how natives name features of their environment. So if you're only concerned with how people sort things out with the cards and how they name them, you're not going to get this everyday experience that they want. So it was fun. But then we moved on to historical ecology. Something happened to a person doing that. Historical ecology, I guess, would say, in brief, that previous approaches didn't pay enough attention to how humans acted and were agents in an environment. And so historical ecology was trying to remedy that by prioritizing human history. I'll talk a little bit more about historical ecology at the very end of this, but that's your basic idea behind historical ecology. So then there's political ecology. Louis, what did you get out of that?
So basically, what he was saying in this chapter is that the
like previous approaches didn't really take into account like the political or like external factors. And there's an example in here about like populations that were like agrarian, that they tended to downsize, or some notable groups downsize because they didn't want to be conquered by a larger group. And then there was a couple of people that he mentioned, like Gezon and Sheridan and Veda and Walters, that were notable.
Yeah, I have this great quote from a volume that was edited by Bates and Lees, who called it case studies in human ecology, but is probably more like political ecology. And you said this quote was thought-provoking. It is. It does provoke our thoughts. While historical change and external influence might once have been regarded as annoying distractions, that's thought-provoking right there, or distortions of indigenous systems, they are now the focus of our attention. So I guess what they're saying is that we once just tried to focus in on the indigenous system, right? What the people knew, like, and when there were those cognitive approaches, and these historical change was an annoying distraction, and if some external influence was there, it was annoying, a distortion. But actually, in today's world, we know that politics and the influences from the outside are enormously important, and we have to understand what they are doing in order to understand ecology at all. So that's probably important. Moran kind of gets down on these guys, though. He says they still lacks a robust theory or a settled paradigm. Those are fighting words right there. If I wrote this on your paper, still lacking a robust theory and your paradigm is unsettled, you'd probably be having a fight out in the parking lot or something, right? That was mean. Yeah, I know. Still lacks a robust theory. Like, I know. What they have a limp theory there.
Daniel Bates or Susan H. Lees were thinking at the time when they decided to think about that.
Well, I don't think Moran, I hope Moran doesn't meet them, because, who knows? That's what Moran says, I think, or maybe he's quoting somebody else who says that anyway. Those tough words. Yeah, I know. He's coming hard at him. Wait a second. He might be quoting somebody here. Well, he seems to be he's not quoting somebody, but he does indirectly cite this person named Biersack. I guess if you were born with that name, you might be able to wail on people all the time. You probably got used to fighting out in parking lots. Let's see, I think that's the way you pronounce that name. Biersack. What a name.
They probably call that Denny's parking lot or something.
Biersack. I don't know what kind of a person that is. Biersack. From the New Ecology to the New Ecologies is the article cited from. Whew. Fighting words. Anyway.
I just gotta ask, did they come up with like a better theory, or did they just rip
I don't know. We're gonna have to look into that. That might be you might have just given yourself an assignment for the next class right there, to track down. The name is Biersack. First initial A. See what happened to this person, because you don't want to just throw that down without having something to back it up.
Let a guy named Biersack share my work.
We don't even know. We don't know what kind of, we just have a first initial A. I don't know if it's Andrea Biersack,
Andrew.
Andrew, it could be. It's A right now.
It's just like,
Which is probably the worst. That's right. Maybe back in the day, I once had a student in Michigan, back when I taught in Michigan, last name Martini. His last name was Martini, and his parents named him A. Just A. His name was A. Martini. I know. Ended up being a union organizer for obvious reasons, right? I mean, what else could you be? I used to get in fights all the time. This person is probably right there with him. They're probably together. All right. Now that we've said a lot of things about somebody we don't know, we'll just move on. Whoa, we don't want all those animations. Stop. Phew. Okay, Jacob, tell us about political economy and human adaptability, which is the next thing. Do they have a robust theory?
They'll kind of adopt farming instead of pastoralism if it's, makes more sense for them in those conditions. And then they'll adopt like social and political structures to keep whatever method they adopted in place. Even if there's more like efficient methods out there, like he included the example of the Amish and how they kind of like treat modern technology as like taboo to kind of keep their practices going, even though they could just, have a tractor and whatnot, but to kind of keep their practices alive and their society the way it is, they kind of exclude all of that.
Now, we talked about this a little bit, I think, kind of in the last class. On the one hand, you're going to have an adjustment to the ecological surroundings based on farming and culture. But on the other hand, you can have ideas about your society and culture, and that prevents you from coming up with a more efficient adaptation. There's something else when we usually talk about political economy, which I think was pretty important here. What do the political economy people want us to think about? Money, right? Having enough money to have that tractor, and the Amish apparently do have enough money, they just don't want it. But that's very important in trying to understand how people adapt to and understand their environment here. So that's what we get to at the end of the theories, is political economy and human adaptability. There we go. Access to cash. We need. Oh, there it is. Page 53. Heat, cold, hypoxia, and disease are still important in human adaptability research, but access to cash plays no less important a role in bringing about or coping with environmental stressors. That's for sure. If I have access to cash, turn on the heat, turn on the air conditioning. As we'll talk about in a second. It's very important. Talking about political economy. All right, let's just dive ahead here into the fundamental concepts and methods. Let's see, that's not Darwin. That's just a person measuring something. All right, the first section of this was ecosystem relationships. John, what did we get out of that?
So actually, this is interesting. So this particular portion of the first chapter, there's population and environment stuff, and mostly it revolves around discussions on how populations have to balance between their birth and death rate ratios, and a lot of the second page talks about like the different methods of like how different populations as they would continue to inspire to grow, I have to have like a certain balance. So sometimes they would, depending on whatever culture they have, like they talk about, for example, certain times they would exclude certain like dietary like restrictions onto themselves for a short period of time in order to reserve a continuous flow of like increase, like to keep everything all steady without having everything balanced out in a way. And also talks about like infant mortality also, which is pretty sad, but it mostly revolves around how these certain populations have to like be like reflective on their environments, how those relationships need to be changed off of what they are given to and what they need and what people need to do to either be within a efficient and productive society.
Yeah, this is what you were expecting when you signed up for this section?
I probably were talking about ecosystem relationships with more like a human non like I wasn't expecting like birth rates and
No, look at
CDR
that.
rates. Yeah.
All those initials, ASDRs, CDRs, GFRs,
Yeah.
and the TFR. Don't forget the NRR. That can
What
be
about the
preferable.
GR?
Oh yeah, the GRR. No, this was not what we were expecting. Nobody was expecting this. This just came out of nowhere. The fertility rates and the child mortalities and the birth and the death rates and oh my, and all these initials and this CBR. Don't forget the crude birth rate. I don't know. So many words. There were so many words that you had to start using all these initials, but then you get confused with the initials. Yeah, I was kind of confused about this
That's why I
part.
just mostly use the end.
I can see why that you were disillusioned by it by the end. Yeah, just go to the
Just
end.
go to the end.
Yeah, just go to the end because there it is. So then I'm just trying to figure out how this works. Then we jumped into soils and plant productivity. Cass, this probably did have something to do with what you were expecting more than the CFRs and the crude birth rates. Yeah, right. What did you get?
In our ecosystem and how plants are kind of like in the point to feed off in the sun, they take the solar energy and they convert it into a form that we can use. They talked about the importance of growing more plants because they're absorbing a lot of energy, but there's a lot of energy that doesn't make it to us. It's lost in digestion, it's lost in the plant supporting itself. They talked about plants and they talked about the environmental factors that affect the plants. Like there's temperature in the environment, there's soil conditions, they talk a lot about soil and the impact of the soil from different soil profiles, different soil concentrations, and then like the soil supply in different environments and what will grow there. We also talked about like human damage to the soil over time due to overuse and stuff like that.
Yeah, the plants are really important. It did strike me the plants seem very selfish though. They seem to be more in it for themselves than for us. They're very important to us, but they seem to be trying to just do things for themselves, like grow for themselves. Which didn't seem nice. So they got the plants and then you got the soils. You love soils, right? Do all geologists love soils or is it more like a rock thing?
There's geology and they touch on soil, but there's ecology, which is just soil.
Where do you stand on the petrology geology scale?
I just find it very important and not really my cup of tea. There are more interesting things out there.
Ah, so you don't love soils so much. Yeah, there's the soils. And the PowerPoint was very helpful on this one, the soils and plant productivity. They gave me a good picture there. You got your soils, and as you put it, they can be improved, but it was kind of got sad at the end, didn't it?
It kind of got sad, but it's also kind of a warning. We need to be careful with our like large scale agricultural processes. And we have to make sure we're not like, overworking the soil. We also have to be careful of our carbon emissions because we're talking about like carbon emissions affecting the ability of soil to regulate the nitrogen levels that the plants need.
this doesn't sound good. It sounds sad. I don't think I can go back, if we were trying to pay attention to large scale agriculture and do something different there, that doesn't sound good. And we're gonna have problems, right? We're gonna have problems feeding the people. But then they said that, he says that over a quarter of the world's agricultural land has been damaged. Well, that's a lot. Anyway. Wow. All right. Soil, plants. And of course, physiological responses. Autumn, what's going on there?
Bodily responses to, so, we talked about, thermal regulation, like, depending on someone's environment, they can, trap or release into certain body temperature. They talked about circadian rhythms and how, primarily light affects like our internal thoughts, how we don't have access to light, especially like in the Arctic, they may have like vitamin deficiencies that can affect their work life. Then they talked about work capacity and basically boiled down how much like work a person can perform is based on their maximum aerobic capacity, so how much oxygen that they're able to get from the environment into their lungs, so they have energy use. And then we talked about work and diet and how people can't perform like functions without a certain amount of calories, and how some environments, when people in certain areas don't have access to those calories, so they have to make them up in different ways. And talked about like food scarcity. Yeah. And income and education and are directly associated with people's diets.
Yeah. All right. Well, keep those things in mind. You got your thermoregulation, you got your circadian rhythms, you got your work capacity, you got work and diet. Some good things to think about in physiological responses to the environment. Yeah. And then there was a section that nobody wanted to do. You left it to me. The sociocultural regulatory adjustments. Why would you leave me with this one? It was long. It sounds like it would be for me. Really, there's too many big words here. As I read it, I've discovered that it really should be, as he puts it, retitled. If we just called it cultural adjustments, then we'd be in much better shape. And maybe some one of you would have taken it instead of leaving it to me. If we look back at what Autumn has just described, all these things, we can see that in our world, we make a lot of adjustments to our environment. Let us say thermoregulation, for example. Is there any cultural adjustment I can make to thermoregulation? Yes. Clothing, yeah, I can put on another layer. Right, okay, that's one thing I can do. What else can I do? Yes. Air conditioning, I can take off a few layers by turning up the AC as long as I have access to cash in order to be able to run that AC at high volume. Yeah, we can do all kinds of things. We have houses, we have tents, we have this room. AC doesn't always work in this room, but I could try. A fan. I have all kinds of cultural adjustments. Then I have my circadian rhythms. we were following our true circadian rhythms as natural people should, what should we be doing right now? Yeah. Well, bed would be a little extreme. And we probably should be doing sort of an afternoon nap or siesta, you know. I mean, it's between the hours of 2 and 4. Those brain waves are going down. But man, we got the lights blazing. We got 24-hour light if we need it. We just crank it up. Screw those circadian rhythms, man. I'm going pure culture here. And if I'm up there, up where I can't get much light and I can't get much vitamin D, what am I going to start doing? Huh? Well, that's true. It is very difficult to live in those places because here it's either very all light all the time or dark all the time. But what do I do if I can't get enough vitamin D up from the sun? Yeah. I start popping pills and eating different kinds of things and importing some food, man. And you know, you should always check your vitamin D levels, especially in this part of the world, because it turns out many of us are vitamin D deficient, because especially right now. So go pop some vitamin D pills. Not too many. And I'm not a doctor, not that kind of doctor, but just check before you do. Work capacity. If I have access to cash, I have access to all that caffeine and sugar that those guys brought in. I can do more work. Same thing with my diet, man. Or if I'm really smart, what can I do to increase my work capacity if I just having a special lot of cash? Oh yeah, I can hire somebody to do it. You know, I can hire somebody. I don't even have to chat GPT is bogged down. I can fire up I can pay somebody to do it. I can pay the $20 a month to chat GPT, and then I can type anything in and it'll answer me, write my papers, do it. Cultural adjustments, man, to all these things. Wow. Makes it complicated, huh? Our last section of this chapter, I think, was this it? What was it? Information and decisions toward actor-based approaches. Liz?
There's more actor-based models that people were more interested in actor-based models. And Rand would go right saying that these are like models under conditions of certainty. He gave an example of choosing what type of cereal you're gonna eat for the morning. And that type of certainty, there's simple rules and pathways for an individual to arrive at their decision. But those other ways people would make decisions under more risky decisions, where people would operate taking complex logic and structure and things and make their decisions better. And like Einstein, but in all for like an overhaul of the economic theory, where decision making may be influenced by one's culture or the area or the physiological structure to measure their decision.
Yeah, this is kind of curious and interesting. At the very end of this chapter, we get to these information and decisions toward actor-based approaches, which, as you put it, concentrate on how the individual makes decisions. And a very important decision that, as you put it, at breakfast, I have a choice between cereal and eggs with coffee in either case. So I guess I don't have the choice about coffee, but I do choose between cereal and eggs. And so this is a very complex decision to make, and we can use it. Well, we can't really use it because that is really not the kind of decisions that most people face in their real life. It's very difficult in real life to model a decision. As we saw, I think back in the last class, I put that whole information tree up there where people, there's all sorts of inputs coming in from all sides. And the idea of economic man, as Liebenstein put it a long time ago, as only motivated by one set of self-interest doesn't really work for a lot of the ways in which people make decisions. However, Liz, you importantly note that people have tried to look more at how not sort of cultural groups or cultural wholes make decisions, but at individuals and the sort of microeconomics, as they put there, of decision making and those kinds of things. And what do they think about the ecosystem, Liz? What would you say this approach would tell us about the ecosystem?
Along with interests in microeconomics, environment, evolutionary ecology, and raising individual self-interest, as well as other approaches that privilege the individual or the community and ecosystem.
Over the ecosystem, exactly. Basically, in a cruder way, who cares about the ecosystem, man? Which is an interesting way to arrive very back at the beginning, which is like, all right, first of all, we had Mickey started us off a long time ago talking about environmental determinism and the ecosystem, and he had us half convinced that environmental determinism was the way, and then we get to the end and it's like, ecosystem. Ha! Who cares? Individual actors and decisions are what matter. Now, you may be wondering, let's go back to the beginning. So we started off here with this chalkboard full of algebra. Wow, that was complicated. And then we looked at environmental determinism, cultural determinism, Darwin, cultural ecology, but then they got dissatisfied with that and then did ecological, political ecology, political economy, did some soils, physiological responses, oh, I forgot that other thing, cultural adjustments, and finally got to this. What would you say about an area of study in which the names of the study are constantly changing? People are complaining about somebody being not robust enough. Then they're like, oh, we're going to do this other thing. And then somebody else says, no, that won't work. We're going to do this. And I've changed my class name like 17 times to just try and keep up with the trends. What would you say about a discipline like this? Yeah, Mickey. Just stop. It does make you want to just throw it all on the trash heap. Like, why did we write? It's can be very frustrating. For me, one of the key parts here where I just kind of lost it was when I told you I was going to talk about historical ecology. And, it was like back on page 50. And again, this is kind of like saying your theory isn't robust enough. The marriage of environmental history with historical ecology has not been consummated. I know. What the heck does that mean?
Whatever happened between pages 52 and 63, which is some kind of like some person wrote in a different book, same subject, and he's like, "Oh, how was that? Oh, it's good," and then he just forgot to take it out afterwards because it was just my person.
Well, maybe. I guess I'm wondering why people would talk about two academic disciplines in the terms of marriages and not being consummated. Well, what does this mean in like plain English when the marriage between these two fields hasn't been consummated? Yeah. Yeah, they're supposed to be getting together, but they aren't getting together enough. Not enough sex in that marriage. None. It hasn't been consummated, man. It's like, that is some weird terminology, man. It's like we need to get these fields together, but they're not. Yeah, I was going to use a different word, but I'll just stop there. I mean, it's some strange stuff. So there was another section that you gave me, the applications of the cultural ecological method, which you didn't want either, maybe because it was long. It was the most exciting section, though. It really was. I got the best parts, actually, and I didn't even ask for them. You just left them for me. You left them out there. I got to cherry pick the good parts. In this section, the applications of the cultural ecological method, which came to us between cultural ecology and something else, talked about 4 different groups that anthropologists have studied and how they have the applications of the cultural ecological method to these groups. And the first one was hunter-gatherers. Now, let's just deal in some stereotypes here. If I were to talk to you about hunter-gatherers, what is your stereotype of what hunter-gatherers do all the time? Yeah. How much do they have to do that to stay alive?
Every day.
Every day. All the time. Barely scraping by, right? That's what you'd think. No, it turns out that anthropologists demolish these simplistic notions about hunter-gatherers, as many of you who have been with me in intro and other classes, to tell you that, in fact, they have these rich social forms, and that to meet your basic needs in a hunting and gathering society, you need to only work about 15 to 20 hours a week. Rest of the time, you can be dancing and telling stories, playing music, doing all the cool stuff of life. So that's a fun thing to learn, that we demolish those simplistic notions about hunters and gatherers. Actually, some of the hunters would like take a month off from hunting. They just like, not getting much hunting. It helps if you have somebody gathering all the time for you, you know, then you don't have to hunt so much. But anyway, it was a good thing. And also pre-industrial cultivators. What's your stereotype about pre-industrial cultivators? Yeah.
Exploiters.
Huh?
Exploiters of like farm development and exploiting the people for them, making those systems of having people pay less, pay more, having people to work more and pay less for just small grains of food than hunter gatherers, which usually is more of a universal share, typically speaking. Like cultivators are more of the, in fact, like more of like the more of the returns off the producer rather than the more like a contract or like a social contract for this. Like if you work for this certain thing in my farm, you get more, you get access towards what you produce.
Yeah, I guess I would want to concentrate on that pre-industrial cultivator. What does that imply, Tori?
Like breeding and everything.
Yeah, what don't they have? Yeah, it's like, why don't they use a tractor, man? What are they doing? Just hoeing along there. Just bring in a rototiller and get this job done. And that's what we used to think about these guys, right? They were just fools. Didn't have any rototillers. Bring in a tractor and make this land produce. Turns out we go and do some anthropology on these people, and it turns out they might have some good ideas. There might be some reasons you don't use a tractor on this land. This land might need to be hoed by hand to make it more productive. So it turns out we might not want to throw them away. How about pastoralists, also known as animal herders? What do we usually think about those people? All of a sudden, we see somebody coming through with about 100 goats or cows. What's our first idea of what's going on? Yeah. Huh? They're pretty rich? Really? Okay, let's reduce it down to about 20 goats. I'm sitting there on the side of Hartwick Hill. Oh, you're on hill, and all of a sudden somebody's coming in with a whole bunch of cattle and has just let them loose on the side of my hill. Or it's not my hill, but here I am. I don't own it. What do I start to think? Wow, you don't have any stereotypes about it does seem that way. What are you concerned about if you want to play frisbee, though? Besides running into the goat. Yeah. Yeah, has anybody seen a goat denuded landscape before where they've eaten everything in sight? I don't know. Maybe I'm down on the herders, but I guess I would say that in our old-fashioned view of herders, there are these people who love animals and come in with all their animals and just set them loose and chew up all the grass, and it's all gone, and then they move on and chew up some more grass, and the next thing you know, it's desert. And it turns out the anthropologists have disproved this stereotype because it turns out they are actually pretty adapted to their environment. All right, small farmers, I'm going to stop asking you for stereotypes, but I'll just say that those people can be smart too. So our idea is that small farmers are simply caught in irrational delusions and they can't figure out and they don't have the science, turns out to be wrong as well. In other words, I think that anthropology and the approaches that we've been talking about have been at their best when they have been demolishing the stereotypes that we have about traditional societies, about these groups. This is a great thing to be able to do because people have been jerks over the years and they've run hunters and gatherers off the land they're on, and they've pushed herders off to the side, and they've tractored up land that should have never been tractored before, and they've burned down rainforests that should have been left as rainforests. So, to the extent that we've been able to demolish those stereotypes and get rid of these ideas, that's great. However, as you can see, I think, from the frustration that comes up in this chapter, it's been very difficult to shift from simply getting rid of our old stereotypes to figure out what people might be able to tell us positively the findings about these environments, or to make larger generalizations about that. That is in part because, as we discussed in the last class, it's hard enough, it's difficult enough to deal with ecosystems themselves, even if there were no people there. Where do you draw the line between one ecosystem and the next? How do you measure what's in it? How do you understand environmental change? Because the environment is always changing. What about the interactions between various organisms? What about because organisms don't stay put and they're always trying to migrate and they're always trying to cross the species lines and they don't care if their marriages are consummated or not. They're always trying to do things like that. How do you deal with ecosystems themselves? And then when you bring in human culture, you have all kinds of weird stuff going on. People trying to make decisions. Do I have cereal or do I have eggs? How strong does my coffee need to be? I need to add sugar to the coffee. If I add sugar to it, how much work calories do I get out of it? No, sugar is against my religion, so I take that away. That's not part of my belief system. Humans should be fertile to this extent. No, I'm not going to be fertile. That's not part of my belief system, right? So there's all these beliefs. Then there's technology. Some people like technology. Some people don't. Some people use it to radically alter their environment. Then that can go wrong. I may not have what I need in my environment, but I get it from somewhere else, and somebody brings me some vitamin D pills, and now I'm ready to go. Oh, yes. And, basically creatures most of the time just move a little bit at a time, but we've like fly places and sail places, and all of a sudden people are in all kinds of different places. So I guess I would say a lot of the issues that have been raised and are so frustrating are because this stuff is pretty complicated. We probably don't need to make it more complicated than it is, or the problem for us now, I think, is how long can we just keep debating and having these smackdown debates between a beer sack and a martini about whether or not your theory is robust enough and whether you've consummated your marriage or not? How long can we do this? Liam? Oh, that's the problem though, Liam. We don't have forever, do we? Cass, how long we got? Not looking good. It used to be we had forever. Back when Abe Biersack wrote that article in 1999, they probably thought it would be forever. But we don't have forever, right? We don't have forever.